I never imagined the sister I trusted most would be the one to betray me in front of everyone I loved. I grew up believing that Madison and I were inseparable. From the moment we were old enough to walk, we were hand in hand, partners in every mischief, every late night secret, every whispered promise that we would never let anything come between us. She was my older sister, my first best friend, my role model, the one I thought would always stand beside me no matter what. I admired her confidence, the way she seemed to always know what to say when I stumbled. People often said she had a spark that drew others in, while I was quieter, more thoughtful, the one who observed before speaking. I didn't mind. In fact, I loved the balance between us, believing it made us stronger together. But even when I was young, there were small shadows that crept into our bond. Subtle moments of envy that I brushed off because I didn't want to believe they meant anything. I remember the spelling bee in elementary school, when I stood nervously on stage clutching the microphone, my heart pounding as I spelled out each word perfectly until they declared me the winner. My parents stood and clapped proudly, but I'll never forget the look on Madison's face. She smiled, yes, but there was something tight in her jaw, a stiffness in her eyes that I didn't understand at the time. Later that night, when I placed the little gold trophy on our shared dresser, she pushed it aside and said it took up too much space. I thought she was teasing. I convinced myself I was imagining things. As we grew older, those small cracks widened in ways I still tried to ignore. At birthday parties, if people complimented me, Madison would quickly draw their attention to her new dress or the story she was telling. At family dinners, if I shared an accomplishment, she'd interrupt with a louder anecdote that shifted all the eyes back to her. Yet despite these moments, I loved her. I believed it was normal sibling rivalry, nothing more. I trusted her because she was my sister, and sisters are supposed to protect each other, not compete as though one's light could only shine if the other's dimmed. By high school, the stakes grew higher. I worked hard, poured myself into academics, and when college applications came around, I earned recognition that I never expected. I was awarded a prestigious scholarship, one that would change my future. The night I received the letter, I ran down the hallway clutching it in my hands to process. But deep down, something unsettled me. The truth I didn't want to face was that Madison was not happy for me. She was furious, though she hid it behind thin smiles and half-hearted congratulations. And the thing about envy is that it doesn't always scream. It seeps in quietly, reshaping moments, twisting truths, until one day it explodes in ways you could never have prepared for. The day everything changed started like any other family gathering. My parents had invited relatives over to celebrate my scholarship and to honor what they called the bright future that awaited me. I was nervous but proud, ready to thank them for their support. The living room was full of cousins, uncles, aunts, and family friends, all buzzing with conversation as my mom poured drinks and my dad played host with his usual charm. I stood in the corner, holding my speech in my head, rehearsing the words I wanted to say when the time came. But before I could step forward, Madison did. She cleared her throat, drawing the room's attention. She smiled that perfect, dazzling smile she always wore when she wanted all eyes on her. And with a voice that carried across the room, she announced, "I have something important to share. Something that proves everything you thought you knew isn't true." I frowned, confused. Everyone turned toward her. My mother gasped softly, asking what she meant, and my father raised his brow in curiosity. Madison let the silence stretch long enough for tension to thicken in the air before she continued. "That scholarship everyone's been so excited about," she said, her voice sweet but sharp like a knife. "It wasn't Olivia's. It was mine. She's been taking credit for something that rightfully belonged to me." I felt the air leave my lungs. I stood frozen, clutching the glass in my hand so tightly I thought it might shatter. Laughter bubbled among some relatives, confusion spread across others. My mother looked from Madison to me, her face pale, while my father's expression hardened, as though he didn't know who to believe. I tried to speak, but my words tangled in my throat. Madison didn't stop. She launched into a story she had clearly prepared, explaining how she had been the one to apply, the one who had written the essay.
Couldn't keep quiet anymore. I can't let her lie to all of you. The room erupted in murmurs.
My mother reached for me, her hand hesitant, her eyes filled with doubt. My father's jaw tightened as though he was already weighing judgment. No one cheered for me. No one clapped in support. No one defended me. In that moment, I felt my world collapse. My sister, the person I had trusted most, the one I had loved without hesitation, was stealing not just my recognition, but my very identity in front of the people whose approval I needed most. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. My vision blurred as tears stung my eyes. I wanted to scream, to shake everyone and make them see the truth, but the weight of their silence pressed against me harder than any scream could. I lowered my gaze, my chest tightening, and as the room buzzed with disbelief and whispered condemnation, I whispered words so faint only I could hear them. It was supposed to be mine, but no one believed me. The room froze when Madison declared it, as if my entire existence had been erased. For a suspended, breathless moment that felt like it went on for hours, the chatter diminished to a curious hush, and then to a silence so complete I could hear the faint clink of ice settling inside the punch bowl. And in that sudden vacuum, every face turned toward me as if I had been revealed to be an imposter who had wandered into the wrong living room, into the wrong family, into the wrong life. And there wasn't a single familiar expression offering refuge. My mother, Elaine, stood near the fireplace with a serving towel clenched in her hands, her mouth parted, her eyes moving between Madison and me as though searching for a script that would tell her which daughter to comfort. My father, Richard, had the composed stillness he wore in courtrooms when he needed to look objective even when he was not, and in that stillness I sensed calculation, the weighing of claims, the reluctance to choose. Around them, the Carters and the connected branches of the family tree occupied the couches and dining chairs dragged into the living room, cousins in their weekend clothes, 2 great-aunts with identical pearls, an uncle who drove in from Providence and still smelled faintly of gasoline. Each person carrying a different version of us in their memories, all those versions now colliding and breaking apart under the gravity of Madison's announcement. Madison hover unsaid, while she described late nights drafting essays at the dining table, the meticulous portfolio she built over years, the recommendation letters she secured, the interviews she attended, the polite rejection that followed, and then, as she told it, the shock of watching me receive a congratulatory call that parroted phrases she had read in her own application feedback. And although I knew it was fiction, it was a fiction told with such practiced detail that heads began to nod the way heads nod when a narrative gives them something simple to believe. She paused after each beat, like a conductor feeling for the right moment to bring in strings. And then she glanced at me with an expression that married pity to resentment, sweetened by a tear that didn't fall. I tried to interrupt, felt the words jam in my throat, and when I finally found a path through them, I spoke with a tremor that betrayed me more than it defended me, insisting that I was the one who had built the application, that the essays were mine, that I had sat alone more nights than I could count, laboring over drafts while the house slept, that the interview was mine, and the scholarship was mine, and there was nothing to dispute. But each sentence sounded smaller than her sweeping accusations, and the eyes in the room slid back to her, as if sensibility lived where confidence lived. My cousin Lauren, who once had celebrated every milestone with me as if it were hers, frowned at me as if I were speaking a language she no longer understood. And Aunt Nora, who loved tidy explanations, leaned toward my mother with that sympathetic look she used when she was preparing to say something that would not help. Madison, sensing the turn, let a different thread loose, one that moved the story beyond scholarship into the delicate territory of family recognition, planting the suggestion that I had been favored in ways that never made sense, that opportunities had drifted toward me for no reason other than parental softness, while she, the firstborn, had been asked to be strong, to be patient, to be the one who understood. It was subtle at first, the way she wove inheritance into the subtext. Not money exactly, but the intangible inheritance of identity and pride, the heirloom of being the daughter whose name went into speeches. Names did, and I realized with a bolt of terror that Madison was not just tugging at a scholarship. She was tugging at the larger narrative of who belonged where, and if she could reposition me as the usurper of her rightful place, then her loss would look like justice reclaimed rather than the consequence of deceit. When I protested again, I heard my voice take on a pleading edge and hated it because begging for belief makes you look guilty, even when you are clean. And I could see the calculus happening in faces I loved, people weighing what they had seen over the years, the report cards, the recitals, the different ways we inhabited attention, and realizing how easy it would be to believe I had gotten used to being chosen. My mother came to me then, but the way she reached for my arm was tentative, the way you reach for a skittish animal. And she asked me quietly, in that soft, careful tone reserved for avoiding explosions, if there was anything I wanted to tell them, which was not a question so much as a request to make this easier by confessing to something she already feared. And it stung in a place so deep I didn't know how to name it. I told her, as steadily as I could, that there was nothing to confess, that the only truth in the room was the simple one where I had applied, I had been interviewed, I had been awarded, and my mother nodded, as if nodding could hold the family together while her eyes flicked back to Madison to see what the next line in this awful play would be. The next line was crueler. Madison turned toward my father with a terrible dignity and said that she hadn't wanted to put him in this position, that she knew how hard he had worked to be fair, but that he had to admit there were documents that would support her account, draft essays saved on the family desktop with timestamps, emails in a shared folder that would show correspondence addressed to her, an outline file with her name in the header. I felt myself sway because I suddenly remembered an evening when the computer froze while I was exporting my essay, and Madison offered to help, and she sat at the keyboard while I paced, and she told me she'd clean up the folder so I wouldn't lose track of my drafts, and how I had thanked her for being considerate. My stomach tightened at the thought that she could have moved files, renamed them, created shadows that now looked like proof, and the realization made me both nauseous and sweaty with outrage. Yet I knew that anger without evidence looks like panic, and panic looks the version that ends the argument, even if it is wrong. I tried to answer him, not by addressing the premise, but by rejecting it. But my words churned in the pressure and came out sounding defensive and wounded. And by the time I said that the scholarship committee could confirm everything, my aunt had already jumped in to say that committees make mistakes all the time. I could feel the ground tilting beneath me, not because the truth had shifted, but because the consensus had. And in families, consensus has a way of becoming truth through repetition. The loneliness of that moment had a texture I can still feel if I close my eyes. The hard edge of the mantle pressing into my hip because I'd backed into it without realizing. The slipperiness of the glass in my hand because my palm had begun to sweat. The faint floral scent of my mother's perfume mixing with the metallic tang of panic in my mouth. I looked at Madison and saw a sister I recognized and didn't. The same dark hair falling in a sleek wave over her shoulder. The same half-moon scar on her chin from when we were kids and she fell off her bike. The same familiar shape of her mouth when she told a story. And yet behind those familiar details, a stranger was operating. Someone who believed that restoring her place required removing me from mine. I searched her face for some signal, some flicker of remorse or uncertainty, but what I found was a settled determination that felt like a door closing. Inside me, another door opened, one that led into a corridor of questions I had kept padlocked for years, because I was afraid of what examining them might do to our bond. I remembered the moments in childhood when my achievements had been inconvenient, the way she sometimes withdrew from me when I succeeded, the way she told me once, in a voice that sounded like a joke and wasn't, that if I kept getting everything, then there would be nothing left for her. I had laughed then and told her love does not run out like sugar in a jar, and she had smiled. And now, in the memory, I could see that the smile had been a cover for a story she was writing in secret. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that tonight's accusation had not been born this week or last month. It had been growing for years, watered by every moment she perceived as unfairness, with the difference. Each maybe felt like a concession woven out of empathy, and yet each one also served Madison's narrative, turning compassion into self-indictment, and I hated that double bind. I wanted someone to interrupt with a memory that cleared the fog. To say, no, we were there when Olivia wrote those essays. We saw her edit until her eyes burned. We drove her to that early interview and waited in the car. We watched another committee pass over Madison and we comforted her. We remember how this actually happened. But no one said it, because memory is political in families, and people wait to see where the authority settles before aligning their recollections. When my father finally spoke, he asked for calm, in that tone that sounded neutral to outsiders and to us sounded like a warning that feelings should be shelved while facts were located. And he said that there were ways to verify the claims, that documents existed, that emails existed, and that the fastest route to resolution was to gather evidence rather than escalate voices. And in the sanity of those words, I heard the convenience of postponement, the instinct to push the reckoning into another room where it wouldn't stain the evening. And I watched Madison incline her head like a reasonable person who welcomed the light. And in that gesture, she gained what she wanted most, time for her version to harden into the default narrative. My mother squeezed my wrist, a small gesture with a tremor in it, and whispered that I should let the dust settle, which sounded so rational and felt like a betrayal, because dust only settles on top of something that was dropped, and the thing dropped tonight was me. I thought of running upstairs to my room, of slamming the door and crying into my pillow like I was 14 again, but I was not 14, and I understood that retreat would be read as surrender. So I stayed where I was and held my head up even as the tears finally breached. And I let them slide without wiping them because I refused to pretend I wasn't hurt. The relatives made the kind of small talk people make when they are embarrassed by intimacy. Conversations about traffic and weather and new lawnmowers blooming awkwardly in corners, as if the spectacle of our family unraveling needed a soundtrack. And over that noise, Madison drifted closer to my mother, leaning in, speaking quietly. No doubt careful cheer. I stood marooned in my own home, an actor who had forgotten her lines, waiting for a cue that would not come. At some point, Uncle Dave approached and told me that misunderstandings happen and families get through them. And although I knew he meant to be kind, the way he said misunderstandings made me feel as though I had become the problem to be managed rather than the person wronged. I wanted to yell that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a rewriting, a deliberate one, and that the longer they let it stand, the harder it would be to set right. But my voice had retreated somewhere inside, where it was busy stitching up the place that had been opened by my sister's blade. When the evening finally thinned and the air smelled of cooling coffee and wilting flowers, pockets of relatives prepared to leave, shrugging into jackets and offering hugs that were hesitant and politic. And in the doorway, I heard the faintest voice from behind me, spoken by someone who had lingered to collect a purse from the side table. A voice that did not know I could hear it over the rustle of fabric and the click of a latch. A voice that shaped the most devastating sentence of the night. Maybe Madison's right. Maybe Olivia doesn't belong here after all. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The night after Madison's public declaration, the walls of our house pressed in on me like they were no longer mine. Every creak of the floorboards sounded accusatory. Every photograph on the walls seemed to question my place among them. I walked past the family portrait hanging in the hallway, the one where Madison stood in the center with her arms around me and our parents flanking us, all of us smiling as though nothing could divide us. And for the first time, I wondered if that picture told a lie. The frame felt heavier than glass and wood. It felt like proof of a bond that had never been real. I touched the image with my fingertips and felt like an intruder in my own story. Dinner that evening was suffocating. My mother set the table with her usual care. Richard sat at the head, and Madison claimed the seat beside him, a place that had always been mine during family celebrations. She smiled faintly when she did it, as though daring me to protest, and I lowered my eyes, because the fight had drained out of me. The food tasted like nothing. Each bite was cardboard in my mouth. My parents spoke in measured tones about safe subjects. My father's case. I almost started to believe it. That was the cruelty of betrayal. It didn't just distort other people's perceptions. It wormed its way into your own mind, making you doubt the truth you lived. And yet, as much as it hurt, pieces of memory began to click into place. Madison's betrayal wasn't born that night. It had been brewing in small, almost invisible ways for years, and only now did I recognize the pattern. I thought back to middle school when I joined the debate team. I remember rushing home, excited to tell everyone that I had been chosen for the regional tournament. Madison listened patiently, then asked if she could borrow my notes, just to practice. I didn't think twice. A week later, when she was asked to substitute for a teammate at a local event, she used those same notes. She won praise for her eloquence, and when I gently reminded her afterward that those were my arguments, she laughed and said, "We're sisters, Liv. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." At the time, it felt harmless. Looking back, I saw the first shadow of her habit, disguising envy as sisterly closeness. There was the art competition in high school, too. I had spent weeks painting late into the night, brushes staining my fingers, until I created a landscape I was proud of. Madison wandered into my room one evening, complimented it lavishly, and then 2 days later submitted a piece that was eerily similar. When she won second place, she hugged me, whispering, "See, you inspired me." I forced myself to smile, even as unease curled inside me. Even in friendships, Madison's patterns emerged. A girl named Sophie and I became close during freshman year. We shared secrets, playlists, and late-night phone calls. Slowly, Sophie started drifting toward Madison, who began hosting her for sleepovers without including me. Within months, I was reduced to watching their inside jokes unfold at the lunch table, my place quietly erased. Madison told me I was imagining things, that Sophie just needed someone more outgoing. I accepted it, but tonight, after her public humiliation of me, I saw it differently. She had always been rehearsing for a bigger theft. What unsettled me most was how skillful she had been at wrapping her envy in gestures of love. If I confronted her about copying me, she said she admired me. If I accused betrayal wasn't spontaneous, what if it had been calculated for years? I shook my head, trying to banish the paranoia, but the thought clung to me like static. I went downstairs to the study, the room where our parents kept old boxes, scrapbooks, and important papers. Something in me needed proof. Not just to show them, but to convince myself that I wasn't crazy. The study smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the floor. I opened drawers, rifled through files, searching for anything that might steady the ground beneath me. I found report cards, tax returns, yellowed birthday cards, nothing unusual, until I noticed the bottom drawer of my father's filing cabinet had been left slightly ajar. Inside was a stack of envelopes bound together with twine. At first glance, they looked like old correspondence, but one envelope was different. It had my name written on it in handwriting that was neither my father's nor my mother's. My pulse quickened. I slid it out carefully, the paper cool against my fingers. The envelope wasn't sealed. When I unfolded the letter inside, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a generic note or a misplaced invitation. It was a printed document with Madison's name at the top and a list beneath it. Bullet points outlining steps and timelines. Some were vague, like undermine her credibility, while others were chillingly specific. Use scholarship as leverage. Turn relatives against her. Question her place in the family. I read it once, then again, disbelieving. My hands trembled as I realized this wasn't a recent creation. The paper was creased, the ink slightly faded, as if it had been tucked away for months, maybe longer. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment attack. Madison had been planning to erase me, strategically, deliberately, and perhaps for years. The room tilted as if the floor itself had betrayed me. My stomach churned. I thought about all those little manipulations that I had brushed aside, all the times I believed her words of admiration. They hadn't been innocent slips of envy. They had been rehearsals, calculated moves in a long game I hadn't even known I was playing. And in that moment, I understood
Madison herself or someone helping her. How long had she been plotting? And worst of all, how much further was she willing to go? I pressed the envelope tighter against me, as if by holding it, I could protect myself from everything it revealed. The study felt colder, the shadows darker. I knew, with a certainty that made my skin crawl, that this was only the beginning. And then, in the heavy silence, I whispered to myself the truth I had been too afraid to admit. My sister has been plotting against me for a very long time. I thought it was just jealousy, until I discovered Madison had been rewriting my story piece by piece. The letter shook in my hands long after I returned to my room. I read it again and again, each word carving a deeper wound. The sentences weren't random thoughts scrawled in a fit of anger. They were methodical, almost clinical, like instructions. Shift attention, plant doubt, reframe her success as your sacrifice. Each line was another dagger. The more I read, the more I realized that Madison hadn't only attacked me in the moment of that scholarship announcement. She had been preparing for this for years, altering small details, reshaping narratives, until I was no longer the girl everyone remembered, but instead a character in her carefully constructed story. I thought back to family gatherings where she spoke just a little too confidently about my achievements, twisting them until they seemed like extensions of her own. When I won the regional debate, she told our relatives that she had been the one who coached me every night. When I got into advanced classes, she implied she had recommended the teachers who gave Olivia a chance. At the time, her words sounded like pride. Now, with this letter in my hand, I could see how those small rewrites accumulated, how they formed a foundation for the lies she unleashed tonight. She wasn't improvising when she stole the scholarship in front of everyone. She was performing a story she had been rehearsing for years, and the audience, our family, had already been primed to believe her. The realization made my skin crawl. Every conversation replayed itself in my memory with a new, sinister meaning. My uncle's comment that Madison had sacrificed a lot so Olivia could shine. My aunt's observation that Olivia always seemed to be given opportunities. They weren't just careless remarks.
Searched her eyes, desperate for an ally. Did you hear what she said tonight? Did you hear them believe her? Chloe nodded, biting her lip. I did, and I don't think it was the first time she's done this. The words hit me like a spark in dry timber. I leaned closer. What do you mean? She hesitated, glancing toward the door again. I've noticed little things over the years. Stories Madison told about you that didn't line up with what I remembered. Times she acted like your successes were somehow hers. At first, I thought it was just her way of handling jealousy, but tonight, she shook her head. Tonight, I knew it was something darker. I wanted to tell her about the letter, about the proof clutched beneath my pillow, but fear tightened my throat. What if Chloe told Madison I had it? What if she thought I was exaggerating? Still, the sincerity in her eyes gave me a sliver of courage. She's been rewriting everything, I said. Not just tonight. For years, and they believe her because she's been planting the lies little by little. Chloe's hand tightened on mine. That's exactly what I've been thinking. She's not just jealous, she's playing a long game, and I think there's more to it than just the scholarship. Her words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean, more? She paused, lowering her voice. Olivia, I think there's something about your place in this family that you don't know. My heart slammed against my ribs. The letter, the manipulations, the betrayals, all of it suddenly seemed like pieces of a much larger puzzle. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as Chloe's eyes searched mine with a mixture of fear and pity. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice breaking. Chloe looked away for a moment, as if she was wrestling with a secret too dangerous to name outright. Then she met my gaze again, her expression haunted. There's a family secret, she said slowly, and if what I suspect is true, it could change everything you believe about who you are, and why Madison is trying so hard to erase you. Chloe's words haunted me. What if Madison isn't just lying? What if she's hiding the truth about... That night, sleep was impossible.
The garden, sitting cross-legged on the bench beneath the old oak tree. She looked up quickly when she heard me, her expression both cautious and resigned. It was clear she had expected me. Chloe, I began, my voice tighter than I intended, you can't just drop something like that and walk away. Last night you said Madison might be hiding something about me. What did you mean? She hesitated, pulling at the edge of her sleeve. For a long moment she didn't answer,
and the silence stretched thin between us. Finally, she sighed. I've been piecing things together for years, Liv. Little things that didn't make sense. I never wanted to believe them. But after what happened last night, I can't stay quiet anymore. My pulse quickened. What things? Her eyes softened with sympathy. Your baby pictures. There are fewer of them compared to Madison's. And I remember once, at Grandma's house, I overheard her talking to Mom about how the truth would have to come out eventually. When I asked what she meant, they changed the subject. At the time, I thought maybe I misheard. But as I got older, I realized there are gaps in your story, Olivia. I stared at her, my chest tightening with every word. Gaps? Chloe nodded. It's not just the pictures. It's the way your parents avoid certain questions. Like when I asked about the day you were born, they gave vague answers. When I asked about the hospital, they changed details. I don't know if you were adopted or if there's some other secret, but I think Madison knows, and I think she's using it to destroy you. Her words pierced me deeper than Madison's lies ever had. Adoption. Misplaced. A secret about my birth. My mind spun, reaching back through years of memories for evidence I had overlooked. The way my mother sometimes studied me when she thought I wasn't looking. The way my father once muttered that blood isn't everything during an argument with Madison. All of it, dismissed at the time, now felt loaded with meaning I hadn't been ready to see. I pressed my palms against my knees, trying to steady myself. So you're saying I might not even be their daughter? Chloe's voice softened. I don't know for sure, but it would explain why Madison's so desperate. If she knows something about your place in this family, she could use it to erase you. The garden felt suddenly colder, the air heavier. My entire body trembled with the pause.
Her words lingered in the air like I wanted to press her for more, but before I could, a sharp sound behind us made me freeze. The crunch of footsteps. I turned my head and saw Madison standing near the edge of the garden path. Her arms were crossed, her eyes narrowed, her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile. For a split second, I wondered how much she had heard, but the answer was clear in her expression. She had heard enough. She stepped forward slowly, her presence suffocating. So, she said, her voice calm but edged with venom. You've been busy digging. My throat tightened. Chloe's hand slipped out of mine. Madison's gaze locked on me, sharp and merciless. You really don't know when to quit, do you, Olivia? She continued. You think you're going to uncover something that will make them all love you again? But trust me, some truths are better left buried. Her tone was low, deliberate, each word laced with threat. She moved closer until she stood only a few feet away, her shadow falling across me. I wanted to stand tall, to tell her I wasn't afraid, but my body betrayed me, stiff with fear. Then she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes boring into mine. Stop digging, or you'll regret what you find. Her warning wasn't protection, it was a threat. The venom in Madison's voice echoed long after she walked away, and for hours I sat paralyzed by the weight of her words. She wanted me to stop, to shrink back into silence, to accept the narrative she had been weaving around me like a spider spinning its web. But something inside me had shifted. The more she tried to silence me, the more determined I became. If there was a truth hidden in the shadows of my family's past, then I had to drag it into the light, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew. That night, when the house was still and the only sound was the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, I began my search. I moved carefully, almost reverently, as though I were trespassing in my own home. My first stop was the hallway closet, where my mother kept photo albums stacked neatly in plastic bins. I carried them to my room and spread them across my bed, flipping through pages of birthdays, Christmas mornings, vacations at the lake house. Photo, where I was sitting in a high chair, cake smeared across my face. The back of the picture had a date written in my mother's handwriting, but the year didn't line up with what I had always been told about my birthday. It was a small discrepancy, maybe a mistake, but it gnawed at me. I set the albums aside and turned to the file cabinet in my father's study, the one where he kept documents locked away. I had watched him open it many times. I knew where he kept the small brass key. My hands trembled as I slid the drawer open and sifted through folders. School records, tax returns, bank statements, everything perfectly organized. When I finally found the folder labeled birth certificates, my stomach clenched. Inside, Madison's certificate was crisp, with clear hospital details, a time of birth, and signatures. Mine was there too, but it looked different.
The paper was slightly newer, less worn than Madison's, as if it had been replaced at some point. The hospital name was printed in faint ink, barely legible, and the attending physician's signature seemed off, almost mechanical, like it had been stamped rather than signed. My heart raced as I compared the two. Madison's certificate looked authentic, lived in, aged by time. Mine looked like a replica. I sank into the chair, clutching the papers with shaking hands. Could it be possible that I wasn't who I thought I was? That I didn't belong in this house, not in the way Madison did? Chloe's words replayed in my mind. There are gaps in your story. And suddenly those gaps felt like gaping holes, swallowing me whole. The next morning, I decided to confront my parents. At breakfast, the kitchen smelled of coffee and toast, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. I placed the birth certificate on the table between us. "Why does mine look different?" I asked, my voice steady, but my hands trembling. My mother's eyes flicked to the paper, then to me. She pressed her lips together, glancing at my father as if begging him to intervene. My father cleared his throat, his voice measured. "It's nothing unusual, Olivia. Records sometimes get reissued. Paperwork changes over time." "But why would mine be reissued and not Madison's?" I pressed. They exchanged a look that only deepened my suspicion. My mother reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "Liv, you're overthinking. You've always been our daughter." That
Forced finality. "Some things are better left in the past," he said. "Leave it alone, Olivia." But I couldn't. Their evasion only fueled my determination. That evening, when they thought I had given up, I returned to the study. My father's locked safe sat at the bottom of the cabinet, a heavy steel box with a combination dial. I had seen him open it once years ago when he needed important documents for the bank. I didn't know the code, but I remembered the rhythm of his movements, the way his fingers lingered on certain numbers. I sat on the floor, my ear pressed close to the cold metal, turning the dial slowly. The tumblers clicked softly under my hand, a code of secrets waiting to be broken. After what felt like an eternity, the mechanism gave way and the safe door creaked open. Inside were neat stacks of documents, envelopes bound with rubber bands, and small velvet boxes of jewelry. But as I scanned the contents, I noticed something odd. A space in the corner where dust outlined the shape of a missing file. Something had been there recently, and now it was gone. A chill ran through me. The file wasn't misplaced. It had been taken. And I had no doubt in my mind who had taken it. The safe should have held my answers, but instead, it deepened the mystery. I stared at the empty space inside the safe, my heart hammering in my chest. Dust outlined the neat rectangle where a file had once rested. Proof that something significant had been there, tucked away in secrecy. It hadn't been misplaced. It hadn't slipped behind the stacks of envelopes. Someone had taken it deliberately. I didn't need to guess who. Madison's fingerprints were all over this. Not literally, but in the way the absence of truth always seemed to benefit her. She had gotten here before me, removing whatever proof could have confirmed what I already suspected, that my story didn't begin the way I had been told. The discovery filled me with a mix of fury and dread. Fury because the evidence had been stolen out from under me. Dread because it meant Madison was always one step ahead, pulling strings I hadn't even realized existed. The next morning, I sat across from my parents at the kitchen table, the safe's emptiness gnawing at me. My mother poured coffee, pretending everything was normal, while my father buried himself in the newspaper. I could no longer hold my tongue, imagining things. "You've been under so much stress lately. The scholarship, the tension with Madison, it's clouding your judgment. The dismissal sliced deeper than any outright denial. Imagining things." It was the same phrase people used when they wanted to silence inconvenient truths. My father folded his paper neatly and said, "You're letting paranoia get the best of you. There was no missing file." I slammed my hand against the table, the sound startling even me. "Don't lie to me. I saw the dust outline. Something was there and now it's gone. Are you protecting Madison or are you protecting me?" Before they could respond, Madison glided into the kitchen, her timing too perfect to be coincidence. She carried her coffee mug with theatrical calm, her robe tied loosely as though she had just woken up.
Her lips curled into a smirk as she took in the scene. "Still obsessing, Liv?" she asked sweetly, tilting her head. "You really should get some rest. You're starting to sound unhinged." Her words were deliberate, designed to pierce. She set her mug down and leaned against the counter, watching me with the detached curiosity of someone observing an experiment. "She was in Dad's safe," I told them, pointing at her. "She took the file. She's been erasing everything that proves who I am." Madison gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Do you hear yourself? You're accusing me of breaking into a safe? What could I possibly want with old files?" She turned to our parents, her expression one of faint concern. "I'm worried about her. She's spiraling, making up conspiracies. First the scholarship, now this. Maybe she needs help." The shift was subtle but devastating. My father's eyes hardened, my mother's hand slipped away from mine, and suddenly I wasn't the victim in their eyes. I was the problem. "Olivia," my mother whispered, her voice heavy with pity, "you need to let this go before it destroys you." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. It was worse. They believed Madison. My sister had woven her lies so tightly around me that even my desperation looked like madness. I tried to speak again, to
startled me. The door creaked open and Chloe slipped inside, her eyes wide with She sat beside me on the floor without a word, letting me cry until the storm passed. Finally, I whispered, "Maybe I am losing my mind. Maybe Madison's right." Chloe shook her head firmly. "No, Olivia, you're not crazy. I believe you. And if the documents are gone, then we need something that can't be faked, something undeniable." I looked at her, confusion mingling with hope. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady but urgent. "A DNA test. It's the only way to cut through the lies. If you're not their biological daughter, or if Madison isn't, it will prove everything." The words hung in the air like thunder, terrifying and electrifying at the same time. A DNA test. A truth written in blood, immune to manipulation. For the first time, a path forward emerged out of the fog. A single test could either destroy me or set me free. The thought clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. After Chloe whispered the idea of a DNA test, my mind spun in circles, caught between terror and hope. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling as questions gnawed at me. What if the test proved I wasn't Richard N. Lane's daughter? What if everything Madison had implied was true? That I was the outsider, the mistake, the girl who never belonged? But then again, what if it proved the opposite? What if I really was their daughter, and Madison was the one who had twisted lies around me for her own gain? Either way, the result would change everything. Once revealed, there would be no going back. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed with heavy limbs, my mind buzzing. Chloe found me in the kitchen, nursing a cold cup of coffee, my eyes distant. She sat across from me, leaning forward with urgency. "Liv," she said gently, "I know you're scared. I would be too. But this test, it's the only thing Madison can't control. She can manipulate documents, twist stories, sway opinions, but she can't rewrite DNA." Her words struck me like a lifeline. For the first time in days, I felt something close to clarity. Still, fear pulsed through me. What if I'm not theirs? What if my hands trembling as I typed the confirmation on Chloe's phone? It felt surreal, like I was plotting something forbidden in the dead of night, but it was the only way to keep Madison from finding out. In the days leading up to the test, I felt like I was living two lives. Outwardly, I went through the motions, meals with my parents, chores, polite conversations. But inside, I was a storm of nerves. I avoided Madison as much as possible, but her presence loomed over me like a predator sensing weakness. She had a way of studying me, of tilting her head with that sharp little smile, as if she could see straight into my mind. And I could tell she knew something was different. She began to linger more in places where I was. If I sat in the living room with a book, she'd appear,
lounging on the couch with her phone, her eyes darting up to watch me. If I slipped outside for air, she would wander onto the porch, humming softly, pretending not to notice me, but never going back inside until I did. She had a predator's patience, waiting for me to slip, to reveal what I was hiding. The tension gnawed at me. Every time she looked at me too long, I wondered if she could smell the fear on me. Every time she smiled too sweetly, I wondered if she already knew about the test. When the day finally arrived, Chloe drove me to the clinic in silence. My palms were slick against my thighs, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might drown out everything else. Inside, the sterile white walls and faint scent of disinfectant made my nerves worse. The nurse was kind, professional, almost oblivious to the fact that this test had the power to split my life into two different realities. As she swabbed the inside of my cheek, I tried not to cry. Chloe squeezed my shoulder, her presence grounding me. In a matter of days, I would know whether I truly belonged, or whether my whole life had been built on a lie. We drove home in silence, the weight of the test sitting heavy in the car. I felt both relieved and terrified, like I had just thrown a stone into a deep lake and was waiting to see how far the ripples would spread. Back at the house, I tried to act normal, but Madison's eyes were sharper than ever. That evening, she cornered me in the hallway, her gaze cutting through me. "You've been acting strange," she said softly, too softly.
Too well. That smile, soft on the surface, carried something sharper beneath it. It wasn't affection. It was desperation laced with menace, a mask she wore whenever she felt her grip on me slipping. "Olivia," she said, her voice almost gentle, "whatever you're doing, stop. Don't drag this family through more drama. Haven't you embarrassed Mom and Dad enough already?" Her words cut, not because I believed them, but because they carried the weight of every time I had been told I was too much, too loud, too difficult. She knew exactly which strings to pull. I forced myself to stand tall even though my knees trembled. "This isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about the truth, something you've been trying to bury." Her smile faltered just slightly, and then she shifted tactics. "The truth? You think a test will give you peace? All it will do is tear this family apart. Mom will cry. Dad will withdraw. Do you really want that on your conscience?" The words were heavy with guilt, and for a moment I almost faltered. I pictured my mother's tired eyes, my father's silence at the breakfast table. But then Chloe's voice echoed in my head. "She can twist anything, but she can't rewrite DNA." I steadied my breath. If the truth destroys us, maybe we were never whole to begin with. Madison's eyes darkened. She stepped closer, her tone sharpening. "Don't be naive. Families survive on what they choose to believe, not on what's written on paper. And right now, they believe me. Do you really want to risk losing the last shred of trust you have with them?" I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't back down. For too long, I had bent beneath her manipulations. This time, I would not. "I've already lost their trust, Madison, because of you. What else do I have to lose?" The mask slipped. Her smile vanished, revealing the fury simmering underneath. "You think you're strong enough to stand against me? You're not. You never have been." I held her gaze, something inside me hardening. Maybe I wasn't before, but I am now. The silence between us crackled with tension. Finally, she stepped aside, her voice dropping into a whisper sharp enough to wound. "Then don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't answer. I pushed past her and left the house, my heart pounding as if I had just walked through fire. Envelope and explained the timeline. "We'll call when the results are ready," she said, her tone professional, unaware that my entire life hinged on those words. As I walked back to the car, the world felt different. The trees lining the street, the cars passing by, the ordinary rhythm of people's lives, all of it seemed distant, as though I were suspended between two versions of myself. The Olivia I had always been, and the Olivia who might emerge after the truth was revealed. That night, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling again, my phone on the nightstand like a loaded weapon. I thought about my childhood, about scraped knees and birthday candles and whispered secrets with Madison in the dark. Were those memories mine, or were they borrowed fragments from a story I was never meant to live? The thought gutted me. Yet I clung to the one thing that had kept me moving forward. The truth was coming, whether Madison liked it or not. Days passed like years. Madison prowled around the house, watching me with suspicious eyes, her voice dripping with false cheer whenever our parents were near. Chloe kept close, her presence a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. Still, the waiting gnawed at me, each hour stretching into an eternity. Then one afternoon, as sunlight streamed through my window, my phone buzzed. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. With trembling hands, I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. "Hello, this is the clinic. We're calling to inform you." The nurse's words blurred, my pulse drowning them out. I heard only the final sentence, the one that sent ice racing through my veins. "The results are ready." My hands shook as I held the envelope that could unravel my entire life. It was heavier than paper should ever feel. Just a sealed packet, a few sheets of printed words inside, and yet it pulsed in my hands as though it contained the weight of my existence. For days I had been waiting for this moment, demanding the truth with every breath. But now that the envelope was here, I wasn't sure I wanted to see it. My fingers trembled as I traced the crease of the flap, knowing that once it was opened, there would be no undoing, no pretending ignorance, no going back to the version of me who believed she belonged without question. I sat on the edge of my bed, the evening light slanting through the blinds in golden strips that painted the room like a prison. Chloe sat across because she knows the truth could undo her. "This envelope isn't your enemy. It's your freedom." Her words were steady, but my fear drowned them. I thought of my mother's arms around me when I was small, of my father teaching me how to ride a bike, of birthdays and holidays and traditions that had always seemed unshakable. What if the paper inside this envelope told me I had no rightful claim to those memories? What if it said I was an outsider who had slipped into their lives by accident or design? The possibility hollowed me out. I turned the envelope over in my hands, my throat tight. If it proves I don't belong, what happens then? Chloe's grip on me tightened. Then you still have me, and you'll still have the truth, and with that, you can rebuild. But if it proves you do belong, then Madison loses everything she's tried to steal. Either way, this ends her lies. Her conviction steadied me, if only a little. I swallowed hard, staring at the sealed flap like it was a locked door to my identity. "I'm scared," I admitted. "You're supposed to be," Chloe said softly. "That's how you know it matters." I nodded, forcing a breath into my lungs, but even as I tried to summon courage, I couldn't bring myself to tear it open. The fear was too sharp, too consuming. I needed space. I needed time. That night, I slid the envelope beneath my pillow, lying awake with the knowledge that it was only inches from my head. Every rustle of the sheets made me imagine the words inside whispering to me, daring me to look. I drifted in and out of restless dreams, where the envelope bled ink across my hands, where Madison's voice taunted me, where my parents' faces turned to strangers. By morning, my decision was made. If I was going to learn the truth, I wouldn't do it alone in my room. This wasn't just my battle anymore. Madison had humiliated me in front of the family, stolen my story in front of them. If the truth was to be revealed, it had to be revealed in the same way, in front of everyone. I told Chloe my plan, and she nodded in quiet agreement. They need to hear it all at once. No more secrets, no more whispers. The idea terrified me, but it also felt right. I would call a family gathering, just as my parents had done the night Madison lingered near the fireplace, radiant in her confidence, basking in the role she believed she still owned. I stood by the staircase, the envelope clutched in my hand so tightly the paper crumpled beneath my grip. My heart thundered against my ribs as I looked around the room. These were the people who had doubted me, who had whispered against me, who had let Madison's lies shape their view of me. Tonight, they would see the truth. Chloe squeezed my arm gently before slipping into the crowd, her silent support anchoring me. I cleared my throat, the sound cutting through the hum of conversation. Slowly, heads turned, and silence fell. All eyes were on me. "I asked you all to come tonight," I began, my voice wavering but gaining strength with each word, "because I need to put an end to the lies. Madison told you a story about me, a story that wasn't true. She painted me as a thief, someone who stole what wasn't hers, and too many of you believed her." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room, but I pressed on. "For weeks, I've been searching for answers,
And what I found led me here, to this. I held up the envelope, my hand trembling. This DNA test will tell the truth about who I am, once and for all. A stunned hush fell over the room. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw clenched. Madison's smile faltered, just slightly, though she quickly forced it back into place. I stepped to the center of the room, my chest tight, my hands damp with sweat. Every relative leaned forward, their eyes locked on the envelope. I slid my finger under the flap, the paper tearing softly, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. My breath hitched. My heart pounded. The truth was seconds away. And then, the silence in the room was deafening as I unfolded the paper. Every breath felt suspended, every eye pinned to me as though my shaking hands were holding the fate of the entire Carter family. The envelope lay torn open on the coffee table, the paper inside trembling in my grasp. The words blurred at first, my eyes clouded with tears and fear, but then they came into focus. Stark black letters that carried more power than any accusation Madison had ever hurled at me. My throat was tight as I read. This DNA analysis confirms that Olivia Carter is the biological daughter of Richard and Elaine Carter. The words rang through the living room like a thunderclap.
Madison's lies don't change the truth. The room erupted in whispers, shock layering every voice. My cousin Lauren stared at me, wide-eyed, guilt flashing across her face for the way she had doubted me. An uncle muttered, "My God," under his breath. Chloe, standing off to the side, met my gaze with fierce pride, her eyes shining as if to say, "You did it." But the face I sought most was Madison's. She stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her eyes wide as though the paper in my hands had struck her across the face. For the first time, the mask slipped completely. The confidence, the calm, the smug little smile, it all cracked, revealing raw panic beneath. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, this isn't right." Her denial was soft at first, but then it grew sharper, more desperate. She stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "This doesn't prove anything. Tests can be faked. Labs can make mistakes. You think one piece of paper makes you legitimate?" Her scream sliced through the room, silencing the murmurs instantly. Everyone turned toward her, stunned by the ferocity of her outburst. My mother lowered her hand slowly, her tearful gaze darting between us. My father stood, his voice low but firm. "Madison, enough." But Madison wasn't finished. Her face flushed with rage. She pointed at me like I was a criminal caught red-handed. "She's tricked you all. Don't you see? She's always been manipulating, always stealing what was mine. And now she's tricked you into believing this piece of paper is the truth." Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward, her desperation spilling into every syllable. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, their earlier certainty fracturing beneath her hysteria. It was clear she was unraveling, but in her unraveling, she clung to one last weapon: doubt. I rose to my feet, my hands still trembling but my voice strong. "The difference between us, Madison, is that I don't need to lie to be believed. This paper isn't a trick. It's science. It's proof. It's the truth you've been trying to erase." Gasps followed my words, and in that moment, I saw the scales tipping. For so long, Madison had controlled the narrative with charm and confidence. But now, faced with undeniable evidence, her story was crumbling. The room no longer belonged to her. Her face twisted, her voice rising. Story everyone believed. She was a cornered prey, lashing out. "Madison," my father said slowly, his voice edged with controlled anger. "Enough. You heard the results. You can't deny facts." But Madison doubled down, her words tumbling out too quickly. "It's wrong. It has to be wrong. They mixed up the samples. Someone tampered with it. She jabbed her finger at me. "She manipulated this somehow. You can't trust it." My mother stepped forward then, her eyes full of tears, but her voice trembling with a firmness I hadn't heard in years. "Madison, stop. We want to hear the truth, not more excuses. Why would you say Olivia's scholarship was yours? Why have you been telling lies about her for so long?" Her demand seemed to pierce something inside the room. The relatives, who had been shifting uncomfortably in their seats, began to murmur again, but this time not with doubt toward me. They turned their gazes on Madison, their brows furrowed, their whispers sharp. Aunt Nora broke the tension first. "Now that you mention it, I do remember when Olivia won that debate in high school. Madison told me afterward that she had written the arguments for her. I believed her. But now, she trailed off, her face flushed with shame. Uncle Dave chimed in. And when Olivia got into that summer program, Madison told us Olivia used her contacts. I thought it was strange at the time, but she was so convincing. The recollections spread like wildfire. Cousins, aunts, uncles, each recalling a moment when Madison had subtly twisted my achievements into something that made me look smaller, less deserving, while elevating herself. One by one, the puzzle pieces of her long con fell into place. The room, which once had been her stage, was now her trial, and from of us that had once looked at me with suspicion, their eyes turned from Madison's collapsing facade to me, some with guilt, some with regret, all of them now beginning to see me clearly for the first time in years. Madison's composure cracked further. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face, though I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another mask. You don't understand. I had to. I've always been overlooked, always second to her. You all made me this way. You gave her every
recognition of her deceit. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, and in a way I did. But beneath the surge of justice was also a hollow ache, the grief of knowing my sister had chosen envy over love, lies over loyalty. As the relatives continued murmuring, Chloe came to my side, her voice low enough for only me to hear. They see her now, Liv. Finally, they see her for what she is. I nodded, but unease still coiled in my stomach. Something wasn't finished. Later that evening, after the guests had begun to leave in tense clusters, I wandered back into the study. I needed to clear my head, to breathe away from the stares and the judgment. But when I opened the cabinet drawer, my stomach dropped. The safe, the one I had unlocked days ago, was ajar again. Papers were scattered on the floor, as if someone had rifled through them in a hurry. Kneeling, I sifted through the mess, searching desperately for the missing file I had noticed before, but it was gone, completely gone. Not just moved this time, erased. And in the disarray, I found something even more chilling. The faint scent of my sister's perfume clinging to one of the discarded envelopes. She had been here. She had been covering her tracks. Madison hadn't just lied, she had destroyed more evidence, ensuring that whatever truth remained hidden in that missing file would never see the light of day. Every lie she told was another thread unraveling from her perfect facade. In the days following the DNA reveal, the air in our home shifted. It no longer hummed with Madison's carefully spun confidence, but with the uneasy silence of a family forced to face truths they had ignored for too long. Relatives who once whispered doubts about me now avoided Madison's gaze. Conversations turned hushed when she entered the room. The image of the perfect elder daughter, graceful, reliable, admired, was splintering, and with each new recollection that surfaced, more pieces fell away. I found myself retracing moments from our past with painful clarity. I remembered how Madison once claimed she had tutored me through math in middle school, when crafting her narrative from my losses. She hadn't been content to shine on her own, she had needed me dimmed. The truth became undeniable when I discovered more scraps of evidence hidden in the study. Buried beneath old bills was a notebook of Madison's, pages filled with her looping handwriting. At first, it seemed like a journal, but as I read, my blood ran cold. She had documented her frustrations in chilling detail. Lines like, "She always gets the praise, and I'll make them see me instead of her." The entries grew darker over time, shifting from complaints to plans. If I plant enough doubt, eventually they'll believe I'm the one who deserves it. By the time I closed the notebook, my hands were trembling. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a single betrayal. It was a campaign, years of calculated manipulation fueled by envy. That night, I couldn't keep it in any longer. I found Madison in the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch, staring into the fireplace as though it could offer her absolution.
My parents were in the kitchen, their voices low, their movements heavy with exhaustion. I stepped into the room, the notebook clutched in my hand. "We need to talk," I said. She didn't turn immediately. Her shoulders rose and fell in a deep breath before she glanced at me, her eyes tired but still defiant. "What now? Haven't you humiliated me enough?" I held up the notebook. "I found this. Do you want to tell me how long you've been planning to erase me?" Her face blanched, but she quickly covered it with a smirk. "You went through my things? How pathetic." I stepped closer, my voice sharp with the anger I had buried for years. "Pathetic is building your life out of lies. Pathetic is stealing what belonged to me because you couldn't stand to see me succeed." The mask cracked then, her eyes filled with tears, her body trembling as though the weight of her deception had finally become too heavy. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You've always been the favorite. Everything came easy to you, the grades, the attention, the affection. And me? I was just there. The older one, the expected one. No one saw me unless I took what was yours." Her words landed like shards of glass, sharp, painful. Believed she might finally admit it all. But Madison had never surrendered easily. She straightened, wiping her face quickly, and her expression hardened into something colder than I had ever seen. "You think one test and a few old notes erase years of being their golden child? You think they'll suddenly love me more because you've exposed me? No, Olivia. They'll never love me the way they love you, but I can still make them hate you." Her words cut through the room like a blade. My stomach dropped as she rose from the couch, her posture once again commanding, her tears vanishing as quickly as they had come. And then, with venom in her voice, she shouted toward the kitchen loud enough for my parents to hear. "She's lying again. She forged all of this. She's making me look like a monster." Her final attempt was not just cruel, it was reckless. The moment Madison's scream echoed into the kitchen, my parents rushed back into the living room, confusion and exhaustion etched across their faces. Madison stood tall, pointing at me with trembling hands, her eyes wide with the hysteria of someone drowning but refusing to admit it. "She forged it all," she cried. "The DNA results, the notebook, the so-called evidence. It's all fake. She's been setting me up this entire time." The desperation in her voice was undeniable, but so was the hollowness. The family had already seen her unravel. They had already heard her contradictions. Now, instead of rescuing her, her final fabrication pushed her even further over the edge. "Enough," my father said, his tone cutting through the chaos like steel. His voice carried not only authority, but deep disappointment, the kind that weighs heavier than anger. "We saw the test results with our own eyes. We heard your lies crumble tonight. Stop insulting our intelligence." Madison's mouth opened and closed, her voice faltering. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed answer. My mother's face crumpled, her tears flowing freely as she turned toward me. "Olivia, I am so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have believed you." Her voice broke, guilt woven into every syllable. The room, once divided, was no longer confused. Relatives who had once whispered doubts about me now shifted away from Madison. Aunt Nora, who had always been her silent cheer, perfect facade stripped bare. Her shoulders sagged, her face contorted in anguish. But the sympathy she had always relied on no longer came. My father stepped closer to me, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "We failed you, Olivia. We let her lies poison our faith in you. That will never happen again." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel healed by his words, comforted by my mother's sobs of apology, strengthened by the family's shift in allegiance. But instead, an ache sat deep in my chest, a hollow wound that no apology could seal. For years, my sister had chipped away at my identity, stolen pieces of me, and convinced those closest to me that I was less than I was. Their sudden recognition of the truth didn't erase the years I had been doubted, dismissed, and silenced. As my parents embraced me, their arms warm but their guilt heavier, I couldn't stop the thought that crept into my mind. Love, once fractured, doesn't return whole. It returns jagged, scarred.
changed. Across the room, Madison collapsed onto the couch, her sobs ragged and broken. Not the manipulative cries of earlier, but raw and ugly. The sound of someone realizing they had lost everything. For a fleeting second, sorrow pricked my heart. She was my sister. Despite everything, we had shared a childhood, whispered secrets under blankets, celebrated birthdays side by side. To see her so destroyed should have brought me comfort, but instead, it carved deeper pain. Because even now, part of me wished things could have been different. But betrayal doesn't vanish with regret. Trust doesn't return with tears. Later that night, after the relatives had left and the house sat in exhausted silence, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My parents' apologies replayed in my head. Madison's screams echoed in my ears, and I kept circling the same impossible question, one that gnawed at me with merciless persistence. If I forgave her, would I betray myself? Justice had been served, but healing was another battle entirely. The night after everything unraveled, the house felt like a battlefield after the storm had passed. The air was still thick with the echoes of shouts and sobs, but underneath it all was a strange quiet, the kind that comes only after truth. Daughter, the girl who had always belonged. It was me. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt complicated. Because while truth had set me free, it hadn't healed the scars Madison had carved into me over years of deceit. My parents hovered near me in the days that followed, their voices soft, their guilt clinging to every word. My mother touched my cheek as though I might vanish if she didn't hold me close enough. My father lingered longer at the breakfast table, searching my face as if memorizing it anew. Their apologies were sincere, their remorse palpable, but still I wrestled with the ache of knowing they had doubted me when I needed them most. They had let Madison's lies blind them, and although forgiveness lingered on my lips, it was not easily given. Madison, meanwhile, wandered through the house like a ghost. The relatives who once praised her avoided her calls. The cousins who once admired her stopped texting. Even our parents, though they loved her, no longer looked at her the same way. The pedestal she had fought so hard to stand on had crumbled, and she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. I found her once in the garden, sitting on the same bench where Chloe and I had first spoken of secrets. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes hollow. For a moment, I almost sat beside her, almost offered comfort, but then I remembered the letter I had found, the notebook of her schemes, the way she had stood in front of everyone and called me a thief. I remembered the pain of being erased by the person I trusted most, so instead I kept walking. And yet, even as I walked past her, sorrow gnawed at me, because betrayal wasn't just about what she had done to me. It was about what we had lost together. We were sisters, we could have been allies, but she had chosen envy, and envy had devoured her from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, I began to reclaim myself, piece by piece. No longer silenced by Madison's lies, I spoke louder, straighter, without apology. I poured myself into the opportunities I had earned, knowing now that I didn't need her shadow to define me. My confidence returned, but it wasn't the naive confidence of before. It was sharper, steadier, forged in fire. I had been tested and I had survived. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw me, it was in how
And Madison had shown no remorse. She wept for her losses, yes, but never for the pain she had caused. And so, I stood in the fragile balance between justice and healing. Justice had been served, my place restored, the lies dismantled, the truth revealed. But healing was slower, more complicated, more personal. One evening as I looked out the window at the fading sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. Betrayal, exposure, vindication, it was all part of a story I had never asked to live, but one that had shaped me nonetheless. I was no longer just Olivia Carter, the girl overshadowed by her sister. I was Olivia Carter, the girl who had fought to reclaim her voice, her truth, her place. And as for Madison, I didn't know what her future held. Isolation, consequences, perhaps redemption if she ever chose it. But that was her battle, not mine. The question that haunted me, though, was this. If I chose to forgive her, would I betray myself? Could forgiveness coexist with the scars she had left, or would it mean silencing my own pain for the sake of a peace she had never offered me? I don't know the answer yet, but I'll leave you with the question I can't stop asking myself. What would you do if the person you trusted most tried to erase you? If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. What would you do if someone you trusted tried to erase you? Don't forget to like this video if you stayed until the end, subscribe with notifications so you never miss the next twist, and share it with someone who needs to hear that truth always outlasts lies.